Chairman. I appreciate you having this hearing. I live in Greenville, South Carolina. I represent Greenville and Spartanburg. We have a major challenge with affordable housing. The city has grown so much. There's been so much people moving into the district. Rents have gone through the roof. Same problems happening all over the country. We have it twice as bad because we also have very poor public transportation. So it really has become a major issue in my district, and I have, like all of you, agree that market forces are not going to solve this problem. The government has to do something. The question then becomes what? Is it to somehow incentivize the developers to invest in affordable units, or is it requiring them, and as some cities have done? Is it creating a fund that will subsidize across the board using general fund tax dollars? Is it deed restricting land to force developers to do it? There's all these different tools in our toolbox, and the question is how. And I think my view on this is that it's a problem when in one building different units are subsidizing others. So if this is important to us, and it is important to us, it should be general fund dollars. It should be money that the entire citizenry pays to facilitate affordable options in urban areas. But then the other thing is public transportation. I mean, there's certain parts of our country that have grown so expensive, it's just not economical to even make the attempt. So the question is, how do you allow people to move in and out, to have access to areas to work and to enjoy that community? Those are the kind of the two variables that I see. Government intervention to facilitate affordable housing, but also public transportation. Mr. Holtz-Eakin, do you agree that those are two of the biggest kind of levers in this conversation?
Yeah, those are central to this. I would really put the relentless focus on supply of affordable housing that Mark Zandi just mentioned at the forefront, because that will dictate the residential patterns that will be viable over the long term, and thus dictate the transportation networks that you need to have to support those residential patterns. So I think you have to get the housing piece right first before you start thinking about getting the transportation piece.
Do you think it's reasonable that the government should create incentives as opposed to requirements to essentially tell developers that we will make it easier for you to develop, whether it's putting your permit in the front of the line? I mean, right now permitting is incredibly backed up in South Carolina because we have so much development. That's going to slow with interest rates increasing. But there's all these different tools. It's not a one-size-fits-all model, and every city is different. So we can all agree that we need to have affordable housing. I guess the question becomes, what tool in the toolbox is the right tool to use to achieve that objective? What do you think the right, and I guess it's very situation specific. What works in Greenville, South Carolina does not work in New York City.
So I think that's the right bottom line, is that we shouldn't presume sitting here in Washington, D.C. to understand the local conditions all around, and we should, permit the flexible use of local tools to get to the objectives. But you do have at the federal level the power to set the objectives and set the targets and try to make sure that we get the outcomes we want.
And I think there's a bigger question of rent versus own. DC has a very complicated system through which you get into a lottery and then you purchase something and you live there and then you only get the benefit of the. I've looked at it extensively. I promise you I have no idea how it works, but it theoretically works. I think the other challenge is everybody does it differently and there's no best practice. Is that fair?
In my opinion, I've never been able to get excited about rent versus own, and that it's somehow the idea we should get every American into an owner-occupied home. I mean,
we know how that went last time.
We need more affordable housing, rental housing, owner-occupied housing, and people are going to decide whether they want to rent or own. I've both rented and owned in my life. I didn't think I was a worse citizen when I was a renter. I actually thought I continue to uphold my civic duties. So I've never understood the magic whereby we want to pick one over the other. And I would like to just focus on supply of affordable housing.
Sure. In the area that I live, we're having a challenge because the city's growing into an area that was lower income and they were all renters. And so the challenge becomes, is it reasonable to ask them to move? And I would say it's not. If they've lived in somewhere for 20, 30 years, have a right to continue to live there. So it's a very complicated situation. I don't want to go over. Thank you so much. I yield back, Mr.
Gentleman's
Chairman.
time has expired. The gentlewoman from North Carolina, Ms. Adams, is now recognized for 5 minutes.